As the sun painted the sky in golden hues, Jonathan Reed, a 35-year-old arrogant millionaire, woke up in his luxurious penthouse in the heart of New York City. Stretching his arms, he felt the soft touch of Egyptian silk sheets and smiled to himself, ready for another day of indulging in the pleasures money could buy. Jonathan rose from his king-sized bed and walked to the panoramic window, observing the city sprawling beneath him. The gleaming skyscrapers reflected the sunrise, creating a spectacle of glass and steel. Below, the streets began to bustle with the frantic movement of ordinary workers, people Jonathan saw as mere cogs in his money-making machine. Subscribe to the channel and click on the notification. Help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers, this way YouTube will deliver this content to more people who will benefit. I count on your help. As he enjoyed his breakfast, prepared by a private chef, Jonathan mentally reviewed his agenda for the day: important meetings, million-dollar negotiations, perhaps a lunch at some Michelin-starred restaurant. It was the life he had always dreamed of and achieved through hard work and, admittedly, some not-so-ethical business moves. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was David, his best friend from college and now a partner in several ventures. "Hey, Jonathan, ready for another day of making it rain?" David's enthusiastic voice came through the line. Jonathan laughed. "Always, my friend. What's in store for me today? Any news?" "Actually, yes," David replied with a playful tone. "I have a challenge for you." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Challenges were rare in his life lately. He had already achieved practically everything he wanted. "A challenge? Now you have my full attention," he said. David chuckled. "Remember our conversation about how money can buy anything? Well, I want to see if you can prove it." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, a confident smile on his lips. "Of course I can. What do you have in mind?" "I want you to get married for a day," David said. There was a pause as Jonathan frowned, confused. "Married for a day? That's it?" "I can easily arrange for a model or actress," he began. No, David interrupted. "It wouldn't be a challenge if it were that easy. I want you to marry someone you wouldn't normally give a second glance to on the street." The millionaire felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "A plus-sized woman," David replied bluntly. "I want to see if you can spend an entire day married to a woman who is far from your usual standards." Jonathan nearly choked on his coffee. "You must be joking," he said. "I'm serious," David insisted. "If you succeed, I'll donate $1 million to a charity of your choice. If you fail, you're the one who makes the donation." The millionaire was silent for a few seconds, thinking. On one hand, the idea repulsed him, on the other, he never refused a challenge, especially when money was involved. "All right," he finally said. "I accept, but on one condition: you arrange everything, the woman, the paperwork, everything. I don't want to be involved more than necessary in this madness." David laughed on the other end of the line. "Deal. Get ready, my friend. Tomorrow, you'll have a very different day from the usual." After hanging up, Jonathan shook his head, wondering what he had gotten himself into. But he quickly dismissed these thoughts. It was just one day, after all, and for the sake of a charity donation, what harm could there be in it? The next day dawned cloudy, as if the sky itself was hesitant about what was about to happen. Jonathan woke up earlier than usual, a mix of anxiety and irritation bubbling in his stomach. He dressed meticulously, choosing a custom-made Italian suit. If he was going to go through this ordeal, he would at least be impeccably dressed. At precisely 9 a.m., the doorbell of his apartment rang. Jonathan took a deep breath before answering. David stood there, a wide grin on his face, accompanied by a woman who made Jonathan's heart sink. She was exactly as David had described, plus-sized, weighing at least 300 pounds, dressed in simple, unflattering clothes. Her brown hair was tied in a messy bun, and she looked as uncomfortable as Jonathan felt. "Jonathan, this is Emma," David introduced, still smiling. "Your wife for a day." Emma looked at Jonathan shyly, a slight blush tinting her chubby cheeks. Hello, she said softly. The millionaire forced a smile, extending his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Emma. David handed Jonathan a folder with the necessary documents for a one-day marriage, a legal loophole he had managed to arrange. All set. You are officially married for the next 24 hours. Have fun, he said with a wave and a wink before leaving Jonathan and Emma alone in the hallway. An awkward silence settled between them. Well, Jonathan finally said, I guess we should go inside. Emma nodded, following him into the apartment. Her eyes widened at the luxury of the place. Wow, she murmured. It's beautiful here. Jonathan shrugged, dismissing it. To him, it was just the basics. Thank you, he said curtly. So, what would you like to do today? Emma seemed surprised by the question. I don't know. I didn't expect you to ask me that. The millionaire sighed inwardly. This would be more difficult than he had imagined. Well, we're married for a day, aren't we? We should do something. A small smile appeared on Emma's lips. Actually, there's a place I've always wanted to visit, the art museum. Would you like to go with me? Jonathan hesitated. Museums weren't exactly his favorite activity, but it was better than being cooped up in the apartment all day. Sure, why not? Emma's face lit up with a genuine smile, and for a moment, Jonathan found himself thinking she had a certain charm when she smiled like that. They left the apartment and took the elevator to the building's lobby. Jonathan noticed the curious and even disdainful looks people gave the unlikely couple. He felt a twinge of embarrassment but, to his surprise, also a spark of indignation at the looks directed at Emma. On the way to the museum, Jonathan expected the awkward silence to continue, but to his surprise, Emma began to talk about art. Her eyes sparkled as she described her favorite paintings and the artists she admired. Jonathan found himself listening with genuine interest, impressed by her knowledge. Upon arriving at the museum, Emma seemed like a child in a candy store. She guided Jonathan through the galleries, explaining each piece with passion and eloquence. The millionaire was surprised to find that he was actually enjoying the visit. You really know a lot about art, he commented as they admired a painting by a famous artist. Emma blushed slightly. Thank you. I studied art history in college. It's always been my passion. Jonathan frowned. And you don't work in the field? Emma hesitated. It's a bit complicated. My family, well, they have other expectations for me. Before Jonathan could ask more, Emma changed the subject, pointing to another artwork. The millionaire let it go but was intrigued. There was more to her story than he knew. After the museum, they had lunch at a nearby restaurant. Jonathan suggested a fancy place, but Emma preferred a simple diner. Initially reluctant, the millionaire ended up being surprised by the taste of the homemade food. During lunch, they talked more. Jonathan discovered that Emma volunteered at an animal shelter and loved to read. She had a sharp sense of humor and a contagious laugh. Gradually, the millionaire found himself relaxing and even enjoying himself. In the afternoon, at Emma's suggestion, they visited a nearby park. Walking among the trees, Jonathan was surprised to realize how light and carefree he felt, something rare in his hectic business life. You know, Emma said while watching a group of children play, sometimes I think people forget to appreciate the simple things in life. Jonathan looked at her, intrigued. What do you mean? She smiled, her eyes shining. Look around us, the green of the trees, the sound of children's laughter, the smell of grass. All of this is free, yet how many people stop to really appreciate it? The millionaire was silent, reflecting on her words. He couldn't deny that there was a deep truth there. As the day progressed, Jonathan found himself increasingly intrigued by Emma. There was a depth to her that he hadn't expected, an intelligence and sensitivity that went far beyond physical appearance. As evening fell, they returned to Jonathan's apartment. The millionaire was surprised to realize that he didn't want the day to end. So, he said awkwardly, I guess our one-day marriage is coming to an end. Emma smiled, a little sadly. Yes, I guess it is. It was a very special day, Jonathan. Thank you. Impulsively, Jonathan took her hand. Emma, I'd like to see you again. Not as part of a challenge or anything like that, but because I really enjoyed spending the day with you. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, but soon a smile lit up her face. I'd like that too, Jonathan. At that moment, something changed between them, a silent understanding, a connection that went beyond appearances or social conventions. Before Emma could leave, Jonathan surprised her with an invitation. Would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow? He hesitated for a moment, but the sparkle in her eyes betrayed her curiosity. Are you sure? I mean, we just met today, and... Jonathan smiled, a genuine gesture that surprised even himself. I'm sure. Besides, technically, we're still married for a few more hours, aren't we? With a light laugh, Emma agreed. They left the luxurious apartment and headed to Jonathan's car, an Italian sports car that made Emma's eyes widen. During the drive, Jonathan explained a bit about his family. My parents live in a mansion on the outskirts of the city. They're quite traditional and somewhat conservative. Emma nodded, a little nervous. Do you think they'll accept me? Jonathan hesitated for a moment. To be honest, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that I want you to meet them. Arriving at the Reed mansion, Jonathan and Emma were greeted by a middle-aged housekeeper who couldn't hide her surprise at seeing the young millionaire's companion. Your parents are in the living room, Mr. Jonathan, she informed, casting furtive glances at Emma. As they entered the richly decorated room, Jonathan's parents, Robert and Margaret Reed, stood up, clearly shocked to see their son accompanied by a plus-sized woman. Jonathan, Margaret exclaimed, her voice betraying a mix of surprise and disapproval. We didn't know you were coming, and with company. Robert, a man with severe features, simply stared at Emma with an unreadable expression. Sensing the tension in the air, Jonathan decided to take the initiative. Mom, Dad, this is Emma. We met today, and I wanted you to meet her. Emma, visibly uncomfortable, forced a smile and extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Reed. Margaret shook Emma's hand briefly, while Robert merely nodded. So, Emma, Margaret began, her tone falsely sweet, what do you do for a living? Before Emma could respond, Jonathan intervened. Emma has a degree in art history and volunteers at an animal shelter. She has incredible knowledge about art, you know. Jonathan's parents exchanged surprised glances, clearly not what they expected to hear. The conversation that followed was tense and punctuated by uncomfortable silences. Margaret asked questions that bordered on indelicacy, while Robert remained silent, observing Emma with a calculating gaze. As the evening progressed, Jonathan felt increasingly uncomfortable with the way his parents treated Emma. He had never questioned his family's values before, but now, seeing the barely disguised disdain in their eyes, something inside him revolted. It was when Margaret made a particularly nasty comment about Emma's weight that Jonathan finally exploded. Enough, he shouted, surprising everyone in the room. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you treat Emma this way. She's an incredible person, intelligent and kind. The fact that you can't see beyond her appearance says more about you than it does about her. A stunned silence fell over the room. Emma looked at Jonathan with a mix of surprise and gratitude, while his parents seemed to have been struck by lightning. Let's go, Emma, Jonathan said, taking her hand. I'm sorry about this. I really thought they would be better than this. As they were about to leave the room, Robert's voice stopped them. Wait, son. Jonathan turned, still furious but willing to listen. Robert stood up slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I apologize for our behavior. We were raised a certain way, but that's no excuse for treating someone like that. Margaret, still shocked by her son's outburst, also spoke up. Yes, we behaved terribly. Emma, please forgive us. Emma, with a grace that surprised everyone, smiled gently. It's all right. I understand that first impressions aren't always the best. Maybe we can start over. The tension in the room began to dissipate. Jonathan, still holding Emma's hand, felt a wave of pride and admiration for her. How could someone be so understanding after being treated that way? The four of them sat down again, and this time the conversation flowed more naturally. Emma talked about her passion for art, and even Robert, normally so reserved, became animated upon discovering that they shared an interest in Renaissance painters. When they finally left the mansion late at night, Jonathan felt emotionally exhausted but strangely light. "You were amazing in there," he told Emma as he drove back to the city. "I don't know if I would have been so understanding in your place." Emma smiled, her eyes shining in the light of the car's dashboard. Sometimes the best way to change people is by showing them an unexpected kindness. Jonathan was silent for a moment, reflecting on her words. "You know," he finally said, "I think I've learned more about life and values in this one day with you than in all my previous years." Emma blushed, but her smile widened. "Well, maybe we can keep learning together." At that moment, Jonathan knew his life had changed forever. The one-day challenge had turned into something much greater, something he could barely begin to comprehend. In the days that followed, he and Emma continued to see each other. The once arrogant millionaire, who had dismissed people based solely on their appearance, now found himself eager to spend every free moment with a woman who challenged all his old prejudices. As their relationship deepened, Jonathan began to notice strange things. Whenever he mentioned meeting Emma's family, she would change the subject. Sometimes he caught her looking away with a melancholic expression, as if she carried a great burden. One day, while strolling through a park, Jonathan decided to address the issue. "Emma," he began hesitantly, "is there something you're not telling me about your family?" She stopped walking, her face turning pale. "Why do you ask that?" Jonathan sighed. "You always avoid talking about them, and sometimes when you think I'm not looking, you seem so sad." Emma was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Jonathan, about my family. And I'm afraid that when you find out, everything will change." Jonathan's heart raced. "What do you mean, Emma? You can tell me anything." She looked him in the eyes, tears forming. "Promise me you'll listen until the end, that you won't judge me." Jonathan nodded, holding her hands. "I promise." Emma took a deep breath and began to tell her story, a story Jonathan could never have imagined. "My real name," she said, "is Emma Rivera. My family, well, let's say they're not exactly what you imagine." Jonathan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "My family owns one of the largest business conglomerates in the country," Emma revealed, her voice trembling slightly. "The Rivera fortune is, well, significantly larger than yours, Jonathan." The millionaire felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "But how? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Emma smiled sadly. "Because that's not who I am, or at least not who I chose to be." She continued, revealing that from a young age, she had rejected her family's luxurious lifestyle. She wanted to live a normal life, make a difference in the world without the weight of the Rivera name. "My parents," she explained, "agreed to let me live my own life away from the spotlight. They understood my desire to be judged for who I am, not for the size of my bank account." Jonathan was stunned. Everything he thought he knew about Emma was being turned upside down. "But your weight, your appearance," he asked, still trying to process everything. Emma smiled, a bit embarrassed. "Partially genetic, partially choice. You see, when you're a multi-millionaire heiress, people tend to approach you out of interest. My appearance, well, it works as a very effective filter." Jonathan was silent for a long moment, absorbing everything he had heard. Finally, he spoke. "So all this time, you knew who I was, about my wealth?" Emma nodded. "Yes, I knew. But that didn't matter to me, Jonathan. What mattered was who you were inside, and over these days, I've seen you change, become someone more compassionate, more open." Jonathan felt a wave of emotions hit him, shame for his initial prejudices, admiration for Emma's strength, and a growing certainty that he was falling in love with her. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, I don't know what to say, except that I'm glad I got to know the real you." She smiled, tears of relief running down her cheeks. "Me too, Jonathan, me too." At that moment, under the park's blue sky, Jonathan and Emma kissed for the first time, a kiss that sealed not only a budding love but a profound transformation in both of them. If you've watched this far, please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you're from. Returning to the story, in the months that followed, Jonathan and Emma deepened their relationship. The once status-obsessed millionaire now found himself rethinking all his values. With Emma's gentle guidance, Jonathan began to use his wealth in ways he had never considered before. He initiated scholarship programs for low-income students, invested in social housing projects, and became a staunch advocate for environmental causes. Emma, in turn, finally found the courage to pursue her passion. With Jonathan's support, she opened an art gallery dedicated to promoting unknown artists from marginalized communities. The couple became known not for their wealth but for their philanthropic work and for challenging high society stereotypes. They were often seen at charity events, Jonathan proudly holding Emma's hand, ignoring the looks and whispers of those who couldn't see beyond appearances. Jonathan's family, initially skeptical, eventually embraced Emma completely. Margaret, in particular, developed a strong bond with her daughter-in-law, often seeking advice on how to be a better person. A year after their first meeting, Jonathan proposed to Emma. The ceremony was intimate, attended only by family and close friends. Emma wore a simple yet elegant dress, and Jonathan couldn't take his eyes off her, marveling at her inner beauty, now visible in every smile, every gesture. It was during their honeymoon that the first dark cloud appeared on the horizon of their happiness. Emma began to feel constantly tired and in pain. Initially, they attributed this to the stress of the wedding and the trip, but when the symptoms persisted after their return, they decided to see a doctor. After a series of tests, the devastating diagnosis came: Emma had a rare and aggressive disease. The prognosis was grim. Doctors gave her at most 2 years to live. Jonathan was devastated by the news. He refused to accept the cruel fate threatening to take Emma from his life so soon. With all his wealth and influence, he dedicated himself to finding a cure. The months that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Jonathan researched tirelessly, consulted the world's top specialists, and funded promising studies. Emma, for her part, faced the illness with courage and serenity, leaving everyone around her in awe. Despite the battle against time, the couple strove to make the most of every moment together. They traveled to places Emma had always dreamed of visiting, created precious memories, and continued their philanthropic work with even more fervor. As Emma's health deteriorated, Jonathan became increasingly desperate. He offered fortunes to scientists, pleaded with doctors, even explored controversial alternative treatments, but nothing seemed able to stop the relentless progression of the disease. It was one autumn afternoon, while watching the sunset from their home's balcony, that Emma finally confronted Jonathan about his obsession with saving her. "My love," she said softly, holding his hand, "you need to accept that some things are beyond our control." Jonathan felt tears burn in his eyes. "I can't give up, Emma. I can't lose you." She smiled, that smile that always warmed his heart. "You'll never lose me, Jonathan. What we have, the love we share, that's eternal, greater than life, greater than death." That night, as Emma slept, Jonathan reflected on everything they had been through together. He thought about the ridiculous challenge that had led him to meet her, the transformation she had sparked in him, the deep and true love they had built. In the days that followed, Jonathan began to reluctantly accept the inevitability of what was to come. Instead of expending energy on impossible cures, he devoted himself to making Emma's last days as happy as possible. They spent hours talking, reminiscing about happy moments, making plans for the future, not a future they would live together, but a future Jonathan would build based on the values and dreams Emma had taught him to cherish. A week before their second wedding anniversary, Emma called Jonathan for a serious conversation. She was visibly weaker, but her eyes still shone with the same intensity as always. Jonathan, she began, her voice a little shaky, there's something I need to tell you. His heart raced, fearing more news about her health. What is it, my love? Emma took a deep breath before continuing. Remember when I told you about my family, about our wealth? Jonathan nodded, confused about where the conversation was heading. Well, she continued, there's something I didn't tell you, something not even my family knows. She paused, gathering courage. When I decided to live away from the world of the wealthy, I didn't just distance myself. I created a secret fund. Jonathan frowned, not fully understanding. A secret fund? Emma nodded. Over the years, I've diverted a significant portion of my family's fortune into this fund, billions, actually, all kept secretly away from prying eyes. The millionaire was stunned. But why? Because I wanted to make a difference, Emma explained, her eyes shining with determination. Not just small donations here and there, but something truly transformative. And now, Jonathan, I want you to be the guardian of this fund. Jonathan was speechless, trying to process what he had just heard. I don't understand. Why are you telling me this now? Emma held his hand tightly. Because I know my time is running out, my love, and I want to ensure that this money will be used to do good, to continue the work we started together. She explained that the fund was set up in a way that would allow Jonathan to use it for large-scale philanthropic projects without drawing attention to the source of the money. You've become a different man, Jonathan, she said with a soft smile. A man who understands the value of helping others, of making a difference in the world. I trust you to use this money wisely. Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. It was an immense trust Emma was placing in him. I promise, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I promise I'll honor your legacy, Emma. In the days that followed, Emma taught Jonathan everything he needed to know about the secret fund. She also shared her ideas and dreams for future projects, from building schools in underprivileged areas to funding innovative medical research. As Emma's health rapidly declined, Jonathan remained constantly by her side. They spent hours talking, laughing over happy memories, and making plans for a future Emma would not see but had helped shape. On the night before their second wedding anniversary, Emma asked to be taken to the balcony. She wanted to see the stars one last time. Jonathan gently carried her, wrapping her in warm blankets. As they watched the night sky, Emma spoke softly, You know, Jonathan, when we met, I thought I was teaching you about life. But the truth is, I learned as much from you as you did from me. Jonathan kissed her forehead gently. You taught me to be a better person, Emma. You changed my life in a way I never imagined possible. Emma smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars above. Promise me one thing, my love. Promise that you'll keep growing, learning, making a difference. Don't let my passing stop you from living fully. With tears in his eyes, Jonathan made the promise. They stayed there, embraced under the starry sky, until Emma peacefully fell asleep in his arms. The next morning, on their wedding anniversary, Jonathan awoke to find that Emma had passed away during the night. She was gone, quietly, with a serene smile on her face. The days that followed were a blur of pain and mourning for Jonathan. The funeral was a celebration of Emma's life, with hundreds of people whose lives she had touched attending to pay their respects. Weeks later, when the acute pain of loss began to give way to a constant longing, Jonathan found himself confronted with the task of fulfilling the promise he had made to Emma. He threw himself into philanthropic work, using Emma's secret fund to launch ambitious projects. Schools were built in underprivileged communities, equipped with state-of-the-art technology. Microcredit programs helped small entrepreneurs realize their dreams. Jonathan became known as one of the country's greatest philanthropists, though few knew the true extent of his work or the source of the resources. He kept the promise of discretion he had made to Emma, allowing good to be done without drawing attention to himself. Years passed, and Emma's positive influence continued to spread through Jonathan's actions. He never remarried, dedicating his life to honoring the legacy of his great love. On his 60th birthday, Jonathan decided it was time to share the full story. He gathered trusted journalists and told them everything: the initial challenge, his meeting with Emma, the transformation she had sparked in him, and the secret fun that was changing lives for decades. The story captured the public's imagination. It was not just a love story but a tale of redemption, personal growth, and the transformative power of generosity. Jonathan used the newfound attention to inspire others to make a difference, no matter how small their contribution. He often said, "Emma taught me that true wealth is not in what we possess but in the positive impact we have on others' lives." As he grew older, Jonathan began preparing the next generation to continue the work. He established a foundation in Emma's name, ensuring that her legacy of love and compassion would continue long beyond their own lives. In his final days, Jonathan often found himself gazing at the starry sky, remembering that last night with Emma. He felt he had fulfilled his promise, that he had lived a life that would make her proud. On the night of his 85th birthday, Jonathan went to sleep with a smile on his face, feeling at peace. He dreamed of Emma, young and radiant as on the day they met. In the dream, she reached out to him, her eyes shining with love and pride. Jonathan Reed passed away peacefully during the night. The news of his death was met with sadness throughout the country but also with deep gratitude for the impact he and Emma had had on countless lives. His funeral was a celebration of a life well lived, a life transformed by the power of love and compassion. People did not just mourn the loss of a great philanthropist but the conclusion of a love story that had inspired millions. Subscribe to the channel and click on the notification. Help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. This way YouTube will deliver this content to more people who will benefit. I count on your help. The legacy of Jonathan and Emma continued to live on through the foundation they established, through the lives they transformed, and through the inspiration their story continued to provide. And so, what began as an arrogant challenge ended as a powerful lesson about love, acceptance, and the true meaning of wealth. The story of Jonathan and Emma became a legend, a reminder that love has the power to transform not just individuals but the entire world.